After midnight on Chicago's South Side, people awoke to pounding footsteps, smoke in stairwells, and armed agents moving down from a helicopter, sweeping up people floor to floor. And out of hundreds of people who were awakened this way, 36 are detained on immigration charges. One, a possible gang member. But none were the violent criminals the officials alleged. So city and state leaders are fighting back. They're drawing a hard line on guard support. And the question is really bigger than one raid. How far does government power go? Does it go into our homes without warrants? We've been here before. The 1968 police riot showed the cost of force without tight controls. But today, the battlefield isn't a public park. It's in the hallways and the living rooms and the bedrooms of our homes. This week on Terrified Nation, what posse comitatus actually means, how it defines when the National Guard can be used, and the guardrails that protect both safety and rights. If we don't set limits on law and order, we may lose the civil society we're trying to save. Coming up next, Terrified Nation. Make sure to grab the show notes on this one. There's a checklist to take action where you live.
If you've ever felt fear, doubt, or despair about the future of our country, you're not alone. Terrified Nation is a podcast for those ready to face hard truths with open hearts. Hosted by Debbie Lynn Molyneux. Each episode explores how we can move beyond division and build a society rooted in care, courage, and connection. If this resonates with you, hit follow and leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. Now here's your host, Debbie Lynn Molyneux.
On a recent night, just after 1 a.m. on Chicago's South Side, people were awakened by the sound of pounding on doors, smoke, and tear gas in their hallways, as 300 armed federal agents poured into their apartment building. And by the end of the ordeal, 37 people had been arrested. People, including kids, were in shock. Their doors were splintered, their apartments ransacked, and federal officials announced they were targeting a Venezuelan gang who were, as of this recording, one of the 37 people arrested. And none of them have been charged with violent crimes. 1 out of 37 arrests. The cost of making this one targeted arrest was paid by hundreds of people, including children, who were removed from their beds, handcuffed or zip-tied, and forced into buses that were waiting nearby. And they sat for hours while law enforcement sorted out who was American, who was undocumented, who had outstanding warrants, and ultimately who would be released to go on with their lives. Is this something that we should be proud of? I don't think so. I know I'm not. Now, to be fair, this building was dangerous for the residents. And subsequent reporting has revealed the dangers of the building itself, with mold and mice and people urinating in the hallways. It had been neglected by the property owners for years. Some of the squatters were the undocumented migrants in need of safe housing that the building owner wanted to evict. So the owner was cooperating with ICE. So what is an appropriate response to a derelict, low-income apartment building that's been neglected by the slumlord? Well, I don't think it's a SWAT-style raid officially billed as targeting a Venezuelan gang. It's just not good law enforcement. And it's certainly not good building code enforcement, especially when hundreds of innocent people are unlawfully detained. This reeks of fear as policy to encourage compliance from us, the people. So what's happening now? Well, Chicago's mayor has declared ice-free zones on city property without a warrant. And the state of Illinois and the city of Chicago have sued to stop National Guard support from being federalized and then sent in for these SWAT-style operations, calling it unlawful and escalatory. In other words, the legal fight is alive, and the stakes are simple but huge. How far can government power go at our homes, in our homes? These are the moments we're asked to choose. Will we protect civil liberties for everyone, or accept a system where anyone's freedoms can be withdrawn at any time? In these sweeps in Chicago, American citizens have been detained and families separated. So who are we becoming? Chicago has seen this play before. Here's what's similar. Heavy force being used in the name of restoring order. Well, in 1968, it was the police and the Illinois National Guard clashing with anti-war demonstrators near Grant Park. Now, the Walker Report, which investigated and documented what happened, later called this a police riot, meaning the police instigated the clash. Today, heavy force in the name of restoring order is pairing immigration enforcement with public safety. And while residents living in Chicago describe peaceful blocks being turned into war zones by this immigration crackdown. The other thing that is similar between 1968 and today is the state and federal tension. In 1968, Chicago faced national scrutiny for excessive use of local force. Now, Illinois and Chicago are in court to limit the National Guard involvement in this federal operation for a local law enforcement act. So those are two things that are similar. Now, here's what's different. The mission and the targets. In the late 1960s and early 70s, it was public protest in parks and streets that was being targeted. Today, it is nighttime immigration raids inside homes in mixed status communities where warrants, probable cause, and due process are the heart of the risk. What else is different is who's in charge. In 1968, it was the Chicago police and the state-controlled guard that led the street response. Today, it's DHS, meaning Border Patrol and ICE, who are out front with the White House pushing for National Guard support and the state contesting it. Another difference, the legal guardrails. In 1968, the state status guard could help with policing. They were under local control, where federal troops were limited and still are limited by the Posse Comitatus unless the Insurrection Act is invoked. Well, we've heard a little bit about that. Today, this is immigration enforcement that is federal. So the DHS acts unilaterally without local approval. And the National Guard support is limited. If the National Guard troops are federalized, which they have been, they cannot participate in local law enforcement. So that is the crux of Illinois' lawsuit. Here's a quick explainer about the use of the National Guard. Posse Comitatus from 1878 says the Army and the Air Force cannot do domestic policing unless Congress or the Constitution clearly says so. It does not. And by policy, the Navy and the Marines follow the same rule. Now, the National Guard, under a governor's command per the United States Code Title 32 state status, shows that the National Guard is a state force, so it can assist with law enforcement. Federalization per the United States Code Title 10. If the president takes control of a state's National Guard, those troops become federal and fall under the Posse Comitatus, unless the Insurrection Act is invoked, which allows limited domestic law enforcement use. Why this matters is that public space protest versus inside the home raids is not a small distinction. It is huge, very huge. The more private the space, the higher the constitutional guardrails and the higher stakes for civil liberties. All right, back to the show. The move from parks to hallways changes everything. We are no longer talking about nightly clashes in a visible plaza or park. We are talking about rolling operations inside residential buildings, kids being pulled from beds, tenants returning to boarded up doors, and bystanders who are zip-tied and held in stairwells. History warns us what happens when force escalates without tight controls, without public oversight. In 1968, that label was police riot. And in 1970 at Kent State, the results were fatal. Citizens were killed. This lesson is consistent. Civil order can be lost fastest by those claiming to enforce it. And here is why Chicago touches everyone. And as I have said, we are Chicago, all of us. Chicago isn't just a symbol. It is a backbone of U.S. commerce. It is the nation's premier freight hub. You know, all those packages you get from Amazon, chances are they went through Chicago. Roughly a quarter of U.S. freight trains and about half of all intermodal trains pass through this region. So when Chicago gets disrupted, supply chains could see a ripple effect nationwide. Prices are going to tick up, deliveries will slow, and productivity will drop. So if the federal crackdown in Chicago spills into more broad militarized tactics at homes and neighborhoods near critical rail corridors, the cost will not stop at Chicago. They will show up in your grocery bill, in your delivery window, and your trust in whether or not it's safe to go to work, to school, or even a peaceful march, like the recent and future No Kings rallies. The national lesson is simple. We need to protect safety and civil rights at the same time, or we end up hurting both. So what are the guardrails that we can choose right now? Well, there are practical limits that protect both safety and liberty. The first is warrant transparency and after-action reports. We need to demand the DHS to publish, with privacy protections for individuals, their warrant counts, their legal basis for entries, and the damage and claims data after large urban operations. Cities already demand similar reporting from SWAT-style team actions. The second thing we need is clear federal and state written agreements. There should be no guard support in cities without written agreements with the governors and mayors that define the mission limits, the rules of engagement, and the command structure. Accountability in ink, not in vibes. All right, third, independent review. Standing Inspector General reviews for any DH operation that detains minors or sweeps up U.S. citizens, and have these public summaries due within 30 days. This may mean reinstating or rehiring inspector generals that the administration fired. The fourth guardrail, equipment and tactic limits. We need to ban explosive breaches or aerial insertions into multifamily residences, absent an imminent threat to life. There was no imminent threat to life in this raid in Chicago. We also need to require body-worn cameras for the federal teams who are operating in cities. This is accountability. So Chicago's question is America's question. How far can government go, and who answers when it goes too far? If our goal is safety and the rule of law, then power must be limited, documented, and answerable to the people behind those doors. So what do you see in the real-time news clips from Chicago? Do you see order being restored? Or do you see civil liberties being violated? Any one of us could be the person filming, or we could be the person who is detained. I am practicing staying calm so that I can be helpful, the most helpful and effective in the moment should it arise. And I wonder, what are you practicing as tensions continue to rise today? In the show notes, we'll link to footage from South Shore, Logan Square, and Humboldt Park, all in Chicago, from Chicago local media. Plus, we'll list this episode's guardrails checklist so you can share it with neighbors and city leaders and your congressional office, because they work for you. Remember that. So if you're ready to lift up new leadership and map a path out of crisis, grab the prompts and choose your next move. I'm Debbie Lynn Molyneux. This is Terrified Nation, and I hope you'll join me next time.
That's Terrified Nation, a podcast from American Future. If this episode moved you, please help others find it. Leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. For early access to new episodes, become a paid subscriber at terrifiednation.com. Join us next time.